Hi, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Today's episode, Earthdawn. Now, folks, this is a reprint of a very classic role-playing game that somehow I completely missed the boat on. This was originally published by the same people who brought you Shadowrun. And to a certain extent, I believe it was supposed to be sort of like the prehistory of the Shadowrun universe, which is ultimately our world. That could be taken or left as you chose, obviously. Strict metaplot, I don't think was anything they had firmly in mind. This is a very interesting setting in terms of fantasy because it is a post-apocalyptic high fantasy, high magic setting. Let me go into what I mean by that. In the established history of this game, there was a massive, huge apocalypse that happened. Basically, the level of magic got too high in the world. People knew it, and some of the eldritch horrors from beyond the dimensions were going to be able to eat their way in. So a lot of civilizations essentially buried themselves underground or put themselves away where they could not be found so that when the eldritch monsters came in and essentially devoured everything, that they could be safe, that they would be able to come back out later. A few of the civilizations refused to do so. One of the elven civilizations didn't and kind of paid the price for it because they tried to make a living hiding place out of their trees, and I don't think it went so well for them. So as the game line continues, about 100 years ago, people started crawling out of the ground. They started coming out of their secluded areas and discovering that the world had gone back to the point where they could live there and that the magic was back to the point where most of the eldritch horrors weren't around anymore. But there were some of their offspring, some of the minor ones still hanging around, which really gives you some of the basis for the fantasy of this game. What you've got going on here is you've got a lot of exploration, a lot of ruins. This has an excuse for having all the ruins around that were always around in most fantasy games, but you were never quite sure why there were ruins around everywhere. This has a really good reason for it. The civilizations collapsed. Everything was gone. So along those lines, you have a lot of your standard races, humans, elves, dwarves. There are a winged race you can play, a rock race you can play. Orcs are a lot more playable in this, so are trolls. And essentially, it is every class that you have, every occupation has a certain amount of magic associated with it that you can use, sort of like advanced skills or specific applications of their skills that come off as magic. There are flying boats that can take you everywhere. This is a fairly high magic post-apocalyptic setting, like I mentioned earlier. It has a very interesting flavor that's very different from your standard Tolkien-esque fantasy, where you almost get the feeling that you could be coming back into a golden age of fantasy and energy and sorcery. This is a very interesting game because what it allows you to do is it tells you a lot of stories that you can't through most other fantasy systems, or it allows you to do them better. There is a complete system for creating your own version of the chthonic monsters that stuck around. There are some ideas, and there is literally a whole world there for you to explore that you're not quite sure what was left from the old age, and how you can leave your mark on it. I think it's very interesting. Engine-wise, it's a little crunchy for me. It's a multi-dice system with a series of modifiers based around an average number. I kind of go by one adage when I look at a game and think, is this something I want to play? I think about my game group I have now and I've had in the past, and I think, can they understand this system well enough to play it that I could teach them to it? And if they can't, I get a little sketchy about the game. While this is a great background, it's a fantastic setting, this is way too crunchy and way too complicated for my group. If you like a more detailed system, if you like a certain amount of crunch, there's nothing wrong with this. This is a good game for that level of play. So, Earthdawn, as I mentioned, is a reprint. It was originally created by FASA, and more recently it is reprinted by RedBrick Studios, the same people that brought you Fading Suns, the reprint of that. So this is a nice company. They have a lot of good stuff coming out. They've got, and there's a well-supported game line that you could get a wealth of information, although I present to you, there's enough in here. I mean, take a look at these two books. There's enough in here that you could run with this for the rest of your life. And you would probably never have to get another book to run this in any campaign you did. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at knwiegel@yahoo.com. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.